Okay, everybody, I just want to welcome you to the third panel for the first day. Today, that's today's final panel for the CityDAO Academic Conference. The topic of this panel is funding Web3 education. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Melinda, who will serve as host for this panel.
Hi, welcome everyone. So glad you could join us today. I'm going to be facilitating and hosting and just keeping the conversation going. If you want to pop a question in the chat, I'll do my best to get to it. We do have some questions we want to pose to the speakers. And if the speakers could just maybe briefly introduce themselves. I think, is there, what is the order of the speakers here? Okay, I think we're going to start with Cesar. Could you
thank you so much.
And then,
Thank you, Melinda. Yeah, so my background is actually in law. I just graduated my master's in international trade law, and I stumbled into Web3 kind of by accident. It just, in my line of work, one of my theses involved the synergy of legal and tech. And I'm also an artist outside of my academic stuff. So when the buzzword of NFT started popping up last year, I've kind of worked my way into the space, ended up authoring an ebook called NFTs for Newbies that has helped educate and onboard over 50 people. And now I've worked my way up as an operations and strategist consultant for a startup that's backed by A16Z.
Great. And I'll let you go ahead and each of you, if you just introduce yourself and give your presentation and then hand it over to the next person. And I can, I'll put in the chat when you got to kind of wrap it up. I'll let you know when you've got a minute or so left.
Do you want me to start?
Yes, please.
Okay, awesome. So I kind of wanted to just talk about the accessibility standpoint of where Web3 education is currently going and what that means for the future and what that looks like as far as applying all of these principles into eventually then educating the masses. So one of the things that I wanted to share with you today is the unique insight that I've had as someone who has actually put together a single document, essentially a PDF, a digital product that has been used as a single source of document that has educated people who didn't know anything about NFTs before. And one of the things that I noticed was there was a lot more enthusiasm towards getting or receiving this sort of product when you have more of a reputation or a standpoint in the space, especially if you're able to provide this sort of education and awareness in a way that doesn't make people feel stupid or out of the loop of the industry. So what I've done is I've basically created this visual walkthroughs of what NFTs are and their use cases in different industries, and also talks about Discord etiquette that will help them avoid scams and that will help them actually identify what projects are worth investing into or tapping into specifically within the NFT space. And what I found was giving that to people as different tiered, I guess. So I initially sold it at 25 GBP just to kind of compensate for the time that I wrote this ebook. And then eventually just started sharing it to others once I felt like I was compensated for that time. And now what I've been able to do is I've actually partnered with a nonprofit organization that wants to help me put together an NFT syllabus to be part of their financial literacy program to help educate girls between 14 to 21 in Canada and the US. So when it comes to funding Web3 education overall, I do believe that that will be or will take the form of Web2 companies or Web2 organizations partnering with those Web3 experts or people who are active within a Web3 space who have education as their mission and focus, and eventually finding a synergy whereby they create these tools that are eventually available in different tiers, whether to experts or companies specifically, or to students, or to marginalized individuals. I do believe that that form takes in the place of partnerships between Web 2 and Web 3 as a merge.
Excellent, excellent. So I think I'm going to just pass it over to Mohit, if you please introduce yourself briefly and take 10 minutes or less, if you'd like, just to present your knowledge for us. Thank you.
Well, first of all, a very good afternoon, Goa Premidi, and namaste from a beautiful country called as India. Mohit over this side. As far as my background is concerned, I've completed my law from India in 2020. I completed my LLM in 2021, and currently I have been pursuing my PhD honors, that too on the premises of blockchain technology and cryptocurrency vis-a-vis corporate governance. As far as today's topic is concerned, that is funding the Web3 panel. So I think the major question that arises up in everybody's mind, that why to fund it? Why it is so much important? Because whenever we talk about a thing called Web3, we always say that Web3 is the future of the internet. It is the future. But I personally believe that this concerned statement that Web3 is the future is a very partly statement. Rather, the full statement is Web3 is the future, and that particular future needs to be so much secured. It needs to be so much appropriate. It needs to be so much completed from each and every angle, as far as the case may be. And exactly what is eventually needed in order to do justice with this concerned thing is the mass adoption, and how this particularly mass adoption will come into picture. There can be several ways that why funding, to whom we should fund, what can be the modus operandi in order to fund all these projects, in order to have the mass adoption of Web3 technology into our being. Because whenever we talk about Web3, Web3 is an ecosystem in itself that is able to disrupt each and every sector, each and every industry that is happening around. Why we are so much going in for? Let's talk about the academic conferences that we are having. Because the ones who are from the academic background, they're always of the view that whenever we attend an event, a conference, a seminar, or a workshop, we used to get a kind of certificate for that. But to the best of my knowledge, as far as this concerned academic conference has been governed, I think they will be issuing the proof of the attendance as such in the form of NFTs. So that's how the things are changing. For example, if we talk about in terms of blockchain technology, we started the thing from cryptocurrencies, and there have been further development time to time in that. For example, there have been cryptocurrencies that have been working on the premises of distributed ledger technology. There are certain cryptocurrencies that works on layer 1. After that, we move on to layer 2. And furthermore, there have been certain developments in terms of ZK proofs also. Now, if we talk about the entertainment industry, the metaverse, the boom that is going to break in the very near future, because we have seen that there have been so much artists that have been doing their work. But why can't we just able to restrict this particular thing to the very well-known artist? Because there have been lack of education, there have been lack of awareness. And Web3 in terms of development, it is not so much difficult, rather just that it is different. Because when we have something called as Web3, so Web3 can be summarized into 3 parts. That is just read, write, but own. And in terms of blockchain technology, that is considered to be the backbone, that is considered to be the lifeline of entire Web3 ecosystem that provides for certain features and certain advantages. For example, it talks about decentralization. It provides the users the privacy. It also deals with the concept of interoperability. Apart from that, the peoples can own the very data that they essentially own. Apart from that, the opportunities in terms of Web3, they are absolutely infinite. And Web3 is for each and everybody as the case may be. For example, if we go on to in the domain of metaverse, the education system that has been suffering from various loopholes. There have been certain countries, there have been certain regions where it is not possible to establish the infrastructure. There is something where the metaverse can play that particular thing around. And in terms of funding the entire Web3 ecosystem, I think the need of the hour is to fund the awareness as such. The need of the hour is to make the people knowledgeable as such, because only then the mass adoption will come into picture. Because mass adoption requires the confidence of the people. Mass adoption requires that the technology is also needs to be so much distinct in itself. It should be user friendly. And how this thing come? Because at any day of the hour, at any day of the year or the century, we can never minimize the importance that education is having in our world. But in terms of knowledge and in terms of education, education is something that is considered to be a very polished thing. And the need of the hour is to make the people aware regarding that particular mass adoption and how this particular mass adoption can come into picture. For example, there have been certain projects that are going around, a lot of jurisdictions, a lot of governments, they are sponsoring that. There can be a collaborations. And who should essentially fund these projects for the terms of mass adoption of Web3? The best way to turn the things around in the most favorable aspect to win over the people as such, it is as simple as that. Why to go so much far? Why to make the thing so much difficult when at the grassroots level can bring the change at the most enormous stage of mass adoption in terms of Web3? Because if we go by the virtue of the very developments that are taking place, then in terms of where to fund, there have been projects, there have been courses that are happening around. And the funding is not merely restricted to the monetary funding as such. There can be funding in kind also. For example, there have been certain projects, there have been certain labs that are offering for these resources free of cost. So the peoples are having that sort of enthusiasm in themselves. They wish to learn. Why they are so much into it? Because if we go by the current trend of Web3 ecosystem in the subcontinent, so there's something for this concerned thing around. Then the persons who are so much enthusiastic about Web3, the persons who are so much enthusiastic regarding the developments that is taking place, so that now essentially the change is coming up, the disruption is coming up, in which there will be an even platform for each and everybody that will be joining this concerned ecosystem, either in terms of cryptocurrencies, either in terms of metaverse, either in terms of NFTs, either in terms of DAO, for the very corporate governance essential principles that are happening around in the various jurisdictions of the world. And apart from that, the GameFi sector that has been suffering across the world from the very low laws, because people were not able to get that ultimate platform from play to earn, for move to earn. And we don't know that how much kind of infinite opportunities that we must be having time to time. Because every day this concerned technology is evolving. It is providing for space and scope for each and everybody, for each and every industrial revolution that can take place in terms of Web3. So this is something from my end today. And in case if there are certain questions, I'm up for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohit. Lots to think about there. And actually, we've had someone join us from Gitcoin, which is a preeminent fundraising outfit, in the Web 3.0 world. So Maxwell's going to offer some responses after the speakers are done speaking, and I'll hand it over to him at that point. So now we've got Wilhelm from CityDAO. Take it away, Will.
Hey guys, my name is Will Jaw, and you may refer to me as Wilhelm on CityDAO. Within CityDAO, I am part of the education guild that helped plan this academic conference. Really happy with the result right now. And I am also involved with the grants guild, and I sat on the grants committee for our first round of grants that we gave out. We gave out around between 20 to 40 Ks of grants. And it was the first time we had the program, so it's a learning experience for everyone on the committee. And that's kind of how I got into the Web3 grant world, and that's very interesting. And personally, before that, I'm involved with campus University of California, Irvine's business plan competitions, where I would be a mentor or judge, depending on my involvement of the year, where we would rate student projects or business ideas, and we would give them anywhere between 5 to 10K, kind of make sure they have an MVP, and then they can talk to VCs or introduce them to investors afterward. Yeah, and from my experience, it's really interesting to see how grants happen on Web3, because I got involved with just the whole crypto world thing back in 2017. And I started, with a couple of my friends, we started by building a mining rig. And, where we mined some Ethereum, we mined some Bitcoin. We made some really good investment, speculative at the time, and then we lost, all of it. Pretty much a lot of people's beginning journey with crypto. But then it's weird because money, as we all know, in the traditional world, money is a tool. honestly, money is just a tool to get you to finish a goal. Like, to make sure things are easy, you put more money in there. You have less money, less resource to achieve that certain goal, it might be a little tougher, right? But in Web3, due to the boom and bust of crypto, I have noticed that people's, how do I say this, people's perspective of money, or how they view money, or how much is, $500, how much is $50,000, how much is like $500,000, they have become very twisted, because it almost seems like, first of all, you don't have cash anymore, and let's be honest, we haven't had cash in a while, because we're using credit cards or PayPal, whatever, everything's digital. So we're used to just seeing a number. It's literally just a ledger, which is what cryptocurrency was all about, right? Just a ledger. Alice gave Bob this, Bob gave Candace this. But now with crypto and all the altcoins, right? Money are literally just created out of nowhere, right? Thin, because where anyone, and now it's a little harder, but back in 2019, right, 2020, anyone could create a token based on a ERC20 token standard. And I tried it, and then I created some token, gave myself maybe 50% of the value, and then I put 10% of them on PancakeSwap, or I think it was Uniswap for Ethereum, PancakeSwap for Binance Smart Chain. And then on the other side, just as a joke, right? Like for the PancakeSwap, I put like 2 Binance coin on the other end of the thing. And then on Uniswap, I put like 1 Ethereum. And what I realized is, once I put it in, the market value of the total market value of that whole swap is doubled. And it's weird, because then did I just create, like a whole ETH of value out of thin air? But on the number it did. And then because of that, right, people just feel like, oh, money's free. And I think I kind of want to dive into that a little bit. Thank you.
If it's okay, I'm just going to kind of jump in. We'll hear Scott briefly, but I'd really like to get Maxwell to kind of target this, if possible, towards education, really towards Web3 education, whether education is about, how can we fund Web3 education? Is it Web2 partnering? Is it through quadratic funding? How does this affect student debt? But really kind of to target this. So maybe if we could kind of move more towards a question of what is Web3 education funding? And if Maxwell, if it's okay with you, if you could just kind of take the lead on that and just, let me kind of turn it over to you, if that's okay.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thanks, David. Really great to be here, folks. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your points that you've made. I think really like what I've taken away from all your points and some is just like the breadth and diversity of applications within crypto, like what's possible. And I think when I think about like one of the most pressing issues in the crypto space and Web3, I think about education, because this is an entirely new sector, relatively new, not too many degrees for crypto. And it's very much a bottoms up industry in the sense of those who are not proficient in crypto have done it through total informal learning experiences. I think there's a big opportunity to educate folks about an industry that has the potential to disrupt all other industries, as you very eloquently said, Mohit. And I think when I think about issues here, I'm very curious for your three's perspective on like the most important problem area to address first. So when we think about funding Web3 education, what is the first problem we need to solve with that? Is it distributing funds so that, for example, what you've done, Cassia, with producing the NFT book, do we need more resources like that, like educational resources produced? Do we need to pay creators? Do we need to pay students to learn? So there's a lot of learn to earn mechanics that have evolved throughout the past few years in crypto. Is that a mechanism we should be taking into account? I'm curious if folks have anything that comes to mind in terms of the first problem area to think about with Web3 education. I might ask you first, Mo, to kick it off, and then Sia, and then Willem, if that sounds like a good order to go in, just giving your thoughts, and maybe we can hop into a dialogue from there.
Sure. So I would like to take this question. And as you said, that how to fund these. I think whenever we talk about various key market players of each and every field, in today's world, when you talk about crypto, when you talk about Web3, so who are the key market players? To the best of my knowledge, to the best of my experience, I personally believe that the key market players of Web3 till date, it is the crypto exchanges, it is the marketplaces, it is the Web3 promoters, it is the persons who are advocating for the need of Web3 because they are getting so much benefits out of it. And it is never wrong to take benefits from such a disruptive technology that can change the entire future of the things around us in terms of GameFi, in terms of cryptos, in terms of metaverse, in terms of any other field that may come in our mind, because the technology is evolving day by day. So these are the key market players from where the funding should go. And as per the very recent discussions, which we are able to highlight the fact that we are making a transition from Web 2 to Web 3. So the Web 2 things which have been gaining so much potential from the time being, for example, I don't know that whether I should take the name of the companies of Web 2 or not, but yeah, it is very good to mention out that the ones who have so much having excellence at par in terms of Web 2. So they will also be shifting there. So the efforts must not only be needed from their end, for their transition, rather they should fund the things out. They should fund the industry, they should fund the education panel, they should also fund the very enthusiastic persons, the ones who are so much genuine, who can literally bring the change, who can make the people understand the concepts of Web3. So this can be one such mechanism. And where to fund in terms of educating the Web3, this entire thing, that can be, we may even fund for the projects, we may even fund for the various courses, we may even fund for making the infrastructure for dispute resolution in terms of having any certain kind of contingencies with respect to Web3. So that is something from my end.
Yeah, I think just to add on that, thanks for the question, Maxwell. So one of the things that I found particularly interesting when distributing or promoting this, the ebook that I put together, is that one of the things that I wanted to solve or perhaps close the gap on is people who aren't Web3 native. So let's just call them newbies, right? Or let's say like Web3 enthusiasts or people interested in Web3. One of the difficulties that from questions I've asked people, what prevents them from wanting to learn more about Web3 is to do with them not having or knowing who to trust when it comes to that information coming from certain individuals or from companies, for example. Because even though I say that I think the best way for Web3 education to be funded is to get that money from where it already exists or where it's currently not being utilized or optimized, such as companies, for example, who say or claim that they have all of these interests or vested interests with their company or brand going into Web3. I think one of the issues that came was how do they get information that doesn't that benefits them the most. So for example, a lot of people will say, well, you know, getting free education on Web3 is so simple because you have TikTok influencers getting partnerships, you have YouTubers talking about it. But can you guys still hear me? Cool. But one of the issues is how do they differentiate from people who are being paid to say all of these things, and how do they know that this information is genuine? And the reason why I say that the merge of Web2 companies or Web2 trusted individuals then finding out some sort of program or a course or providing a tool that helps educate people is because it's better for those information to come from brands or companies or people that people already trust, as opposed to seeing new faces that they don't necessarily recognize, and then all of a sudden them being labeled as, oh, these people are the ones who are teaching us about Web3, because people who don't know anything about it might not immediately understand what's in it for them, because we live in an incredibly capitalist society. People were always thinking about, you know, quid pro quo principles. So I would say, yeah, the battle first for me, from my experiences, how do we get people to trust those who are perceived as experts in our field, as in Web3, and then getting them to work with people who already work outside of Web3 who are interested in helping mass education.
Hi, Sesha. I think that's
Desire.
Desire.
Yeah.
I think that is a great point, especially when you said, we need to make sure that whoever is delivering the education to the general public has to be trusted themselves, almost like back before my time, Walter Cronkite, anything he says, people would just trust it. Americans did. And like, I have met a lot of people who are still afraid of using MetaMask. And if you understand how the wallet works, because it doesn't actually keep money in there, people think the actual crypto coins is in your browser, and they think that it's very strange that where I use my Google search, where I use my email, where I use my Facebook, and you're telling me that my 50 Ethereum is in this little mask over here, this little extension. They don't think that this is something that's secure. All right, and then why is that? It's because there has been a lot of scammers in the Web3 space, right? Even a lot of people who have been very careful, or they thought they were, right? But then if you make one single mistake, you got your private key phished, and then everything's gone. And then people only hear about these kind of stories in the mainstream media. And who should be funding this? I think that's the main point, right? Well, who's the key stakers? I think first of all, the exchange, any centralized exchange, they need to fund the education, because they're basically the banks for people who refuse or do not understand how decentralized exchange works. And even though, let's look at Coinbase, right? Personally, I don't like their model, but Coinbase, I want to say they are the entry point for most people, especially in the United States, to have their first, crypto token, crypto account, or even making the first trade. So, and on their, user terms of use agreement, they do say that if you lose anything, it's not our fault, right? Because they have to protect themselves like that. However, I do feel like, and they had a lot of accounts that was hacked. I think it was 2-3 years ago, but Armstrong came out and said, we don't take any responsibilities. And everyone was calling Coinbase, and their customer service was not available. You would not get a response. And after that, a lot of the mainstream folks who was excited about crypto, they took all their money out. And I had some friends who called me maybe beginning of this year, say, hey, how do I convert all my crypto back into fiat coins? And I was like, why are you doing this? He said, yeah, I don't trust any of the exchanges. There's too much scammers. I think Web3 is gonna become thin air pretty soon. And these are smart doctors and lawyers. So I think we should start from there, where people who are holding people's money, and then where that's the entry point, we need to have regulators talk to them and make sure that you need to educate your customers before they use your product. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. I think there's a lot of richness in those 3 points that you have all mentioned here. I think, yeah, Cecilia, your point around social trust, I think is really important. I think that in a new industry that is pretty much, yeah, there's like a lot more scammers and folks with like ulterior motives in crypto, because it is a new industry. It's all kind of online. It's kind of like predicated on anonymity and pseudonymy, like not be, you don't have to like have your actual identity type of things. It kind of makes the industry susceptible to people kind of scamming. And I think that knowing where to trust information is really important. I think when I think about trustful information, you had mentioned brands. I think that's a very interesting point. And I do think that there is kind of pros and cons to big brands. Like, I would consider even Binance and Coinbase to be exchanges and big brands, kind of to your point, Mohammed, of like kind of starting with where the most value is. I think it's tricky to think about those big brands leading the charge of the education, because ultimately those are companies that are for profit, that are kind of like centralized companies, even though they do provide decentralized products. And they, of course, want to increase their bottom line, like they want like more profits. And I think the power of the education is really bottoms up education. And since there is a parallel economy of value emerging on the internet, I think the potential for that to fuel really amazing educational innovations and experimentation is pretty big. I think thinking about Web3 education as, making sure folks kind of understand how their crypto works in exchanges is an important place to start, because there does need to be that fundamental financial literacy, since crypto is like an inherently financialized industry. But I think the potential of decentralized systems, of like trustless environments, I think is pretty important when it comes to the way people learn in a fully digital world. And one question I would pose as well here is maybe to you first, Mohammed, when you think about kind of redistributing value from exchanges, where do you think that value might go? Who do you think should be funded when it comes to Web3 education? I'd love to hear your thoughts as well on this side. If you think that maybe big brands should receive more funding to be able to lead the charge in education, or if we should be funding smaller stage creators and learners to do more educational experiments. You as well, Wilhelm. Would love your thoughts as well from this, from a funding perspective. But maybe we can go Mohammed, Wilhelm, and then Cecilia.
Oh, really sorry. Were you referring to me?
Oh yeah, sorry. Mahet,
Okay, that's fine, that's
sorry
fine.
for
It's
mispronouncing
completely
it.
understand. It's fine.
My apologies.
Yes, so I've prepared a list because currently, though being a very young enthusiast of cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology in Web3, but yeah, I'm kind of old school, so I've prepared some handwritten notes for that, at whom we should fund, where should this particular value should go in order to get the most way out of it, that how to resolve the petty disputes that we are having around this particular technology. So whom we should fund? I think first of all, we should fund the entrepreneurs that are so much concerned in this space, who are able to have that particular sort of modus operandi to make the change out of it, to get something so that the life of the people can be made so much easier, to so much comfortable, and at the end of the day, so much valuable as such. Because if they're bringing their time, they're bringing their efforts, they're bringing their idea, they're getting the use of the technology, that to the very latest one out there. So I think the first it should go to the entrepreneurs in terms of education, then it should go to the developers, then startups, then either the ones who are working the domain of technological aspect or non-technological aspect. Because as I already pointed out, that Web3 is certain that is for all of us. It is not restricted to the coders or non-coders. It is not restricted to the technological aspects or the non-technological aspects. So we should have that certain kind of equality among all. Other than that, we should fund certain universities that are literally want to work in this domain. Because what I have personally believed, that they have in certain establishment of private universities that are only operating on the online mode, but the kind of resources that they can make out of their studies, the kind of lecturers that they are able to hire. And when we talk about Web3, the best thing is that you may be a lecturer of law, you may be a lecturer of scientific technology, you may be a lecturer of biotechnology, or any other field as the case may be around the world. But for Web3, first of all, the only thing and the prerequisite is you need to be an enthusiast of this Web3. You need to be the enthusiast of the very technological aspect, the advancement that is taking place across the globe in terms of Web3 and the advancement as such. Then there can be funding that may go to the NGOs, the advocates, the creators, the projects. But why it should be done? It should be done because this will lead to motivation and perfection in their work. This will also lead to a very qualitative aspect of various creations that can resolve the things out. They can have a certain value in the longer run for this particular industry. So that is something from my end.
I think I go next. That's a good point. And funding entrepreneurs and everything. And I think you mentioned, Maxwell, like where, let's say we have, take the exchange to have them fund these education, where should the funding goes, right? I was reading over kind of like the panel's topic again, is funding Web3 education. And it's interesting because depending on how you read it, like where you put a comma, and I feel like people are like the way where we started before the question format, everyone's understanding of this, the topic is a little different. Like, is it funding Web3 education as in someone, like my brother knows how to use MetaMask, right? Knows what a blockchain is, knows what is exchange, what is centralized exchange, what is a hard wallet versus cold wallet? Or are we funding, for example, like the overall wellness, right? Like as a whole community believe that, hey, I remember when like digital, I think when internet money first came out, what I mean is that credit card, you can buy stuff online. No one like trusted it, right? Like, even though it was safe, even though it wasn't like super safe, no one trusted it. But then eventually now it's like, oh, why wouldn't you just buy it on Amazon? Like before, just talking on the phone or typing your credit card number on the internet is just like such a strange feeling, because you never reveal that number to anyone. Is it one day where you're gonna be like, hey, everything's good? Obviously there's gonna be a lot of technical like gas fee, right? And transaction fee. See, those things are not solved yet. But after those are solved, us like social contract wise, are people going to be comfortable doing that, right? So is that what we're discussing? Or like there's a third way of talking about this, is the earlier panel that we had, right? Talking about, for example, the CityDAO University, where there's like a whole Web3 style of teaching that we want to put money into and give perhaps, these kind of entity a funding so they can start, they can get accredited, right? They can hire professors, they can have teachers and students on board. That's something I think it's just we can think about. And I know Gitcoin does a lot of almost like funding Web3 education, because you guys fund public good. And then that public good, I took a look like earlier for today, I saw, for example, a Twitter, like see who has the .eth first followers. Obviously that's not towards education, but then let's say someone who's a researcher trying to find a pattern on someone who has ETH, right? And then like how they interact online with their account, with the .eth account, versus if they don't have an NFT on there. That might be a good education, a tool that could benefit Web3 education kind of route. So that's something for you to think about too. Thanks.
So just to kind of like bring all together all of the points that have been said, and also to answer Maxwell's question, I think I'm going to answer some of the questions that are being asked in the chat because they're super interesting. It's one of the things I've also talked about in some Twitter threads that I've done. So the question that I want to answer is more so not who the education should go towards, but more so who should be funding all of this type of education, right? And I'll try not to go on a tangent, but there was one recent thread that I shared with the group chat for this panel, and I talked about how there is a course in Oxford University, Cambridge University, well, not Cambridge University, sorry, I live in Cambridge right now, and there's a symposium on economic crime happening this week, and they're actually talking about the regulations and compliance happening in blockchain, so I'm getting them mixed up, but there is a blockchain strategy program that University of Oxford is currently offering, and this has been advertised to me on my IG, on my Instagram story. And so obviously the algorithm is already picking up what sort of interest that I have, and then they're picking up all of these things. And I clicked on it and I saw that it's currently going for 2,350 GBP. I don't know what the USD conversion is, but it's a lot of money, and it's a short course. I think it's 6 weeks. And the problem that I saw with that almost instantly was when I checked back in that program 2 weeks later, they had changed the starting date. So they had either postponed it due to people maybe not applying, or enough people applying that they see a reason to keep it going. So they've changed it at least three times from the last that I've seen. And I kind of assumed that it was because there might not be a lot of demand for it, or people don't know that it exists, so they're not applying. And one of the things that I posited in that thread was, if University of Oxford decide to then partner with a DAO, for example, right? They'll be able to, because Web3 is so new right now, it's literally about who has the most bragging rights, so who can claim the most bragging rights that they can then keep talking about for the next 10 years as Web3 progresses and develops. And I said that for such an old institution such as University of Oxford, if they were to become the first educational institution here in the UK, particularly because they're so well known in such an elite level, if they were to partner with a DAO and then provide this program for free instead, and follow sort of like an application, show who is the most interested, show who has the means of maybe learning about Web3 and how they can use it in their line of work as an entrepreneur, as an educator, or whatever line of work they're doing, then University of Oxford then will just go through the same process that they do, which is who has the most merit or who has the most potential to be able to capitalize or optimize what they've learned from this program, and then apply it into the real world, or apply the uses of Web3 as a use case for whatever they're doing. And the reason why I thought this was a good idea is because these companies, these institutions, they have money. And I think it's important for us to be able to kind of hold them accountable as far as putting the money where their mouth is, basically. If you're saying that you're so interested in the development of Web3 and you want people to learn more about it, then why don't you make this program for free? Because the courses, they've labeled it as for busy executives who want to apply blockchain into their business. And I said those people are typically not going for old institutions such as the University of Oxford. They're going to tech agencies, they're going to Web3 agencies already, going directly to the source. So I said there's really no demand for this for the target audience that they're sharing this or marketing this program to. So why not just share this program, which is already clearly written, the syllabus already outlined, share it with a DAO, for example, like CityDAO, who already have like a grant guild or an educational guild, and work out the best way for them, for all parties to benefit from it. And I do believe that whilst I said that companies or brands should also be able to put where the money and where the mouth is because I do believe that 5 years from now, brands and companies' integrity will depend on how much they have actually helped the progression of Web3 in the most ethical or appropriate way, without there being a lot of like greed involved, because Web3 communities do a great job of doing that already. They know when celebrities come and show their NFT projects purely for just money. And so I think that if we were to find companies or institutions or organizations to fund Web3 education, they should also be held to the same standards of these celebrities coming into the NFT space and saying like, look, if you haven't shown clearly, genuinely where your actual intentions are for the people and the members of this community, we don't want you. And they eventually just get faded out anyway, just because of social proof.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I think one thread that I'm picking up on is kind of the question of whether Web3 will disrupt traditional education or whether Web3 will enhance traditional education. I think something I've seen a lot lately is, courses at university or high school adding like NFT credentials and kind of soulbound tokens and those sorts of things to their credentialing. I think that's an example of Web3 enhancing education. I think there's also many examples of parallel kind of systems where DAOs run their own educational experience. I think personally, as an individual, I am much more interested in the future where Web3 disrupts traditional education rather than enhances it. I think there's an opportunity to redistribute funds in like a pretty equitable and radical way to like fund very bottoms up things. I do feel like the idea, and I think your thread is really amazing, Saya, about like kind of Oxford and like why Oxford has pushed it back so much. I think traditional educational institutions aren't in the best place to really leverage Web3 versus like, I don't know, I feel like there's a lot more 12-year-olds who like get Web3 a lot better than like 45-year-olds. And I think like the trend there is like these younger generations are just going to pick up on this new tech in a way that older generations aren't going to be able to adapt to. And we're going to have this like parallel system of like funding mechanisms and educational experiences that like, at least as like an educator myself, makes me very excited. I think to kind of dive in maybe to this section, it might be kind of our last or second to last kind of discussion point here about whether or not we feel Web3 will enhance or disrupt education. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the CityDAO University model, Willem, and kind of what you feel like the potentials are there. I missed the earlier session, so maybe you could give like a quick TLDR recap on what the CityDAO University model will be. And then I think it'd be interesting to hear everyone's like reactions and whether or not that new model could be as equitable for learners as possible and how Web3 might enhance that.
Yeah, sure. And, Scott and David, if I'm explaining it a little, off track, feel free to jump in. CityDAO University is still a concept that, the education guild at CityDAO is experimenting with right now. And then this academic conference is basically the precursor of what we're doing, because you need to first have a series of like conferences, right, or symposium to build credits in order to get accredited. I think that's our plan. And then with a Web3 university, a lot of times it's the bottom up model that you were just explaining, because students are able to select or recommend and vote on the classes and subjects they want to teach, right? And the professors that they want to have to teach these kind of classes. And after they receive any certifications or diploma from the university, it will be an NFT token. That seems like a very natural evolvement, right? Using an NFT to be your diploma, or even to be a resume, which is what the soulbound token that Vitali, I believe, discussed earlier this year. Your life's work is on this token. You can give it to any education system, hopefully in the future, and then you can plug it in. They know all your paper, they know all your credentials. And at the same time, maybe professors, you get a little token whenever they teach a class that shows their record, and then that's a little incentive to come back and teach. Are there anything I'm missing, Scott?
I mean, if I could jump into that, just, because I feel like we're trying to target on Web3 funding. So soulbound tokens don't exist. That's like, maybe it's, they might or might not happen. So ultimately the question is, how do we fund students who want to learn something? That's it. How, students come together, they want to learn something. I think, David Staley made some fantastic points earlier today about maybe rethinking the whole idea of accreditation. I mean, it's just such a fool's game. It's so like pyrite to go after an organization that has no vested interest in ever changing and just wasting millions of dollars and God knows how many person hours to try to convince them. So maybe we want to rethink that. But my vision for this has been very much like what Lambda or Tech Elevator, or what the coding schools have been able to do, where you don't pay a penny until you get a job that pays you $50,000 a year, at which point you pay back never more than 10% of your salary for a period of time. That to me is disruptive. Anything else is like, you could pay nothing for Khan Academy. You could just have Khan Academy Plus. That's essentially what we would be, where we'd have these asynchronous videos, you'd pay less. We would have, but is that really disrupting the whole nature of the system? To me, you want to disrupt higher ed, it's got to cost nothing. You want to be 65 and come back to school? Fantastic. It costs nothing. If we're making money from this, it's because we're providing value from this. So to my mind, what we would need to do is make sure that in CityDAO, the courses, especially if we can dismiss the idea of accreditation, you don't need to take this core curriculum in order to get this pedigree. Instead, what if we worked with the output? What if we worked with the job and said to them, what skills do you want someone to have? Leadership, time management, being able to be what do they call it? Something master, where for coding, you have the board, you know what I'm talking about? Anyway, so it's like
Scrum Master,
that's it. Somebody was just talking about it at dinner last night, a Scrum Master. Yeah, like if you had a job that had certain things that they wanted, and then we set about teaching those things, and the skills were verified by the job, you get out, you get the job. What other accreditation do you need other than that happened? And if that's happening and you're making money and we're getting a percentage of it, and we have very low overhead because we don't need the same kind of physical castle-like campus, and everybody's paying with, let's say, Ethereum, which we're staking. And then Scott had wonderful ideas about the idea that if we have Ethereum, when you take a class, let's say you pay 1 ETH for a class, but the class only costs half of an ETH. At the end, when you graduate, you get half of an ETH back, or you could get 1/4 of an ETH and governance tokens. And the governance tokens are what allow people to make that decision about what's going on in the school. And there might actually be a value, not a like 1-to-1 USDC value, but some sort of value, so that you have this ERC20. And particularly, just to kind of throw it in here for the conversation, the idea that the governance tokens could be staked for quadratic funding of public goods for what the CityDAO University would then, should we buy an apartment building in Bangladesh? Should we buy a coffee shop in Nepal? Should we open up, should we rent an apartment in Brooklyn? Like, what do we do? And your governance tokens would help vote for that. So I think there's a lot of fantastically interesting ideas we could do by giving up the idea of accreditation. Sorry, that's me, throwing out some ideas. Scott, maybe you've other things you wanted to say to that?
No, I could definitely back up a lot. Yeah, just to Staley's talk this morning was so profound. I thought it was just like, I have a model in my head. He basically just described the model. So, I mean, my model is pretty simple in some ways. Like, first of all, you want most things to emerge. You don't want to plan how it's going to look. You want to let how it should look emerge from the tools. And I have this kind of simple notion that you want a university where teachers own classes and students own the university. Like, conventionally now, teachers have very little control for a university class. I mean, of course, they control a bit, but it's really not much. Maybe the high-end academics of the name can kind of create their own class. And students also have no choice over class selection. So teachers should be able to really change the class how they want. They have direct feedback because they own the class, and students can operate the university, and you get rid of the bureaucracy. I mean, that's just a huge thing. Universities are over 50% bureaucracy, and David mentioned that you minimize it as much as possible. Maybe you can't get rid of it, but bureaucracy doesn't mean democracy. Such a simple slogan, but bureaucracy ends up just the most entrenched, hard to move conservative organizations, and you just want to get rid of them, to be blunt. And that's my model.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Scott. Thank you for saying that. This is kind of like a shameless plug here, but I just linked like a thread I wrote from a few months back. But basically, like I copy and pasted the first part of it, but I couldn't agree more about like the potential for Web3 education being student-owned universities. And I think, David, you brought up a really phenomenal point as well about, you can kind of stake half and youth for a class, and at the end of it, you get a quarter of that back, and then you also get governance tokens. And that's like a really good way to like perpetually allow students to own and govern their universities. I think the current model we have in the US is pretty broken in the sense that we have students basically going into debt to like pay for educational experiences that privilege accreditation over impact. I really like the idea of a future where accreditation is more or less like not really what matters, because like ultimately the impact of that education is what matters most. If you get a degree to like land a job and you don't land a job, it doesn't really matter to me whether or not like the local government or state acknowledges that degree. It matters to me more so that like this person's quality of life has been increased by their investment in their education, by like their investment in themselves. And I think that if we can somehow use like Web3 primitives to enable that, to me, that seems like a genuine application and like a worthwhile application that's really worth building. And I do think that having DAO governance tokens to enable learners to govern their experience together, to me, is very powerful. I also think about quadratic funding, which has been mentioned a few times. I can give a quick TLDR quadratic funding for folks who are like, what the F does like those words mean together? So basically, quadratic funding is a mechanism that allows us to privilege the opinions of the many over the few. So quadratic funding is a way to redistribute funds from a matching pool. And most matching campaigns is 1-to-1. So I give $1, it's matched $1. But with quadratic funding, it's matched to the amount of people who give. So 100 people giving $1 each is matched exponentially more than one person giving $100. So the idea is it doesn't really privilege like whales or folks with large sums of money, but it privileges the community as a whole. I think there's a lot of applications for how quadratic funding, or QF for short, could be used to fund education. If you consider a classroom, for example, and there's 20 kids in the classroom, if they could all redirect funds together to what they want to see, whether it's like paying for a professor, paying for like maybe someone who's like very prominent, eminent in the field that they're studying to come give like a lecture or a workshop, paying for a field trip to go somewhere where they can learn more about whatever they're learning about. I think to me, that is a really powerful way for students to direct funds and have agency in their learning. I think I've yet to see that be underexplored, but would love to open this up to anyone else in the audience or anyone who has any additional questions for our esteemed panelists here, or any kind of concerns or questions or statements I'd like to make. Would love to make some space for that.
If I can ask a question, just having you here, Maxwell, when I've presented the idea of quadratic funding or quadratic voting to other academics who are not involved really in the Web3 space, but more than others, they've heard of it. They have some familiarity with it. And when I've said it, I get a general response that I don't know how to overcome. And the response is, it'll never work because no matter how many people you get, the whales are so much exponentially larger and they fundamentally have the power of coercion. So you get 100 people, well, a whale can bribe 1,000 people. And there's always going to be these whales who could just buy up, whether it's, harbinger taxes and, this idea of we're gonna change the system to make it a value for everybody. And that, how do we deal with that in a society where whales have so much more resources than the group? Just curious how you might address that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's a really tricky problem. I do think that QF as a model isn't perfect, as you highlight. Like, syllable resistance is a big issue, and syllables are, anyone who kind of pretends to be a different person or like a group of people. Yeah, like let's say there's like a nation that has like a giant army of like 1 million people. They could basically just like force that army of 1 million people to just like vote for whatever they want to see in a QF instance, and then that gets funded because it's 1 million people. I do think that QF is definitely susceptible to capture in that way. I think that when I think about ways to design against that, I think really what we need to do is like uplift and amplify the voices of the people we want to be deciding things. I think those are the people who have either been like marginalized the most in any given context, or those who have like the biggest stake in the local community. I think there's ways to use like kind of soulbound tokens or other ways to like verify that you're a unique human that's kind of acting with your own volition. I think that is a model that could work, basically just like trying to eliminate whales, but that doesn't really work so well. I think something that has emerged lately in some like kind of Gitcoin circles is the idea of like pluralistic funding. And basically with QF now, it's like any two people collaborating, like any two people funding something together is funded more. The idea with like plural funding is the two people who are funding something together, the more diverse they are, the more different they are, the more that's matched. So the idea is that like if me and my family of like 300 people, I'll fund something like that's good, that's like different people, but we are in the same family or like we're in the same community. But if I'm funding the same public good as someone who is completely different than me from like every sort of like demographic and like geological perspective, that's even more valuable because it shows that a diversity of people wants to see something funded. I don't know if that like alternative to QF or that kind of like enhancement of QF is like entirely capture resistant, but I do think that it does take a step in the right direction of not having whales just like funding things. I do think we need like the everyday community members, people who have been historically marginalized to like direct those funds. I think in our normal world day to day, like that's almost impossible. But I think as we're creating this like parallel economy of value with crypto, we have the opportunity to kind of bake these things in from the outset. And I think that would be like a very powerful primitive to have going forward for education, like everyday people to cyber funds go. Because ultimately they're the ones that benefit most from it. Whales just obviously want to, keep being whales. Like it's not the best motive, I think, for funding things. But yeah, thanks for asking that question. I think QF is really interesting, and there's definitely some points of growth for it as a mechanism.
I love the anti-coercion stuff. I've read about that, and yeah, I think part of the big issue is just going to be once people are using things that are on the ETH chain, because then we can see if you have an NFT that shows what political party you're in, you have an NFT that shows what groups you're in, then we can show that you're in very diverse groups all supporting the same public good. But right now it's so hard to verify that. Anyway, I want to thank you all very much for your participation, for your interest in this. It's now 4 o'clock, so I don't want to keep anybody late. So that will conclude today, the first day of the CityDAO Academic Conference. We will start again tomorrow at 11 a.m. for any of you guys that are interested. We'll have our keynote speaker, Scott Meyer, and then we have a series of projects and papers being being presented. So that is very exciting. Thank you all again. And it was great to see you.
Thank
Have
you so
a
much.
wonderful weekend.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks all.
Thanks.
Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, Scott, for the
Guys.
opportunity. Thanks a lot.
Take care.
Question.
Thank you.